I couldn't let this one go, folks, so I've decided to make a video about it because I think that intentional violence in our beautiful game of rugby is not necessary and it should not be stood for in any context. G'day everyone and welcome to Inside Rugby. My name is Mark. If you haven't been here before, I'm a Kiwi rugby fan that's living here in beautiful Cancun in Mexico. In today's video, I wanted to go back from a week or so ago and look at this horrendous act that took place during a game of Super Rugby down there in Australia between the Fijian Drua side and the Melbourne Rebels. It was a terrible incident and I wanted to talk about it, but I also wanted to get your views on it because I've heard some people say things that I think are totally unacceptable.
So actions of 9 white.
Oh, on the back of Josh Cannon's head.
Mate, I've seen enough, thanks mate.
That's terrible.
Bring it back to me, 9
Frank
red.
Lomani didn't need that.
He's going for another shot, young man.
Found its groove so nicely.
Such an important very quickly and started to find some form. Wow, that's also going to be a red
Time off,
card.
please.
That is a scrap red card.
Ollie, I've got 18, blue.
Now, unfortunately for many, the game that was played between the Rebels and the Fijian Drua at Amy Park in Melbourne just over a week ago will be remembered not for the spectacular rugby that was played between the two teams, but there was two incidents that took place during the game. Both ended up with red cards, and quite rightly so, and since then we've seen the judicial process go through its elements as well, which is something else we'll talk about in this video. But I'm going to start off by looking at Frank Lomani's incident on Josh Cannon, and this was a horrendous act as far as I was concerned. This was intentional abuse, and you can see here when the ball came out and Josh Cannon was obviously chasing the ball, whether he is in an offside position or not. Frank Lomani decided to take the matters into his own hands and not let the referee do his job, and he just cracked down on the skull of Josh Cannon. Now, if Josh Cannon was your son playing this great game of ours, I don't know how you would have felt about this particular incident. And when I posted this online on one of my shorts the other day, I had a number of people saying, hey, time to toughen up, bro. This is what it's all about. You've got to be tough to play the game of rugby. Well, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. And I think that's a load of nonsense. And this is absolute violence. And I want to bring everybody's attention to this today by making this video to talk about what would have happened to Frank Lomani if he was outside the grounds of Amy Park and he actually did this to somebody in the streets of Melbourne. Now, the reason I brought that up is because if Frank Lomani had done this to somebody outside of the stadium, he would have been up against the law in Australia that talks about actual bodily harm and intentional bodily harm. And there's no doubt about it that he intentionally decided to take Josh Cannon out with this lurid act against him as Cannon came through on the other side of the ruck. The law in Australia states that if you intentionally cause any bodily harm to anybody, as Frank Lomani was doing in this particular action, it could lead up to 5 years imprisonment. And in fact, if it's deemed to be even worse than that, you could end up for 7 years in prison as a result of doing this. So what gives someone the right to get away with doing this on a rugby field when 100 meters outside the stadium on the road? If he was prosecuted and somebody made charges against him, he could actually end up in jail for this. Now, not only do I think this is a bad look for the game of rugby, this is a bad look for the individual. This character has taken it upon himself to actually cause this kind of harm to Josh Cannon. Now, I saw this photo afterwards with Canon's head all wrapped up, and plenty of people will say, I'm sure, to this video that, yeah, come on, toughen up, bro. Bit of blood in the game of rugby, that's what it's all about. But unfortunately, it's not. There's too many head cases, concussions, and too many ex-rugby players are living their careers after the game of rugby, and the cameras and the spotlight have gone away from them, the spectator support, and they're living with all sorts of problems because of the knocks to the heads they've got. Now, what happens to Josh Canham in the future, no one will know, and we don't know if this has caused any problems at all, but it's no different than a boxer getting into a ring and being knocked out by their opponent. So I think this was totally uncalled for, and I'm very, very disappointed that Frank Lomani from the Fijian Drua has just ended up with 6 weeks suspension as a result of this despicable act on Josh Canham. I think he should have been set an example of. I would have liked to seen Frank Lomani having to sit out the rest of the Super Rugby season, because this sort of behaviour has to be stamped out of our game. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, this is what happened later on in the game, and we're watching here Yoni Kora Dua from the Fijian Drua team. He was actually a substitute that came on, and he decided to headbutt the opposition after losing this particular scrum. Again, a player taking into their own hands their judicial system they think is appropriate after something goes wrong on the field of play, and Kora Drua was obviously shown a red card, quite rightly so, for this one as well. You know, I think the Fijian Drua head coaching staff of Mick, Brian and others need to have a closer look at this and ask the questions, what's going on with the discipline of their players in the Fijian Drua team. This is unacceptable, and we see from time to time the Fijian players losing their head at key moments in games and doing these things out on the spur of the moment. Understand there's a lot of emotion involved, there's a lot of tension in a game of rugby, and of course men want to be men, but having a good strong tackle against someone rather than stomping their head with your elbow or headbutting your opposition is not what we want to see on rugby fields across the world. Now, I don't know these two individuals involved, Frank Lomani or Yoni Kora Dua. I don't know what their characters are like. I don't know if they're hot-tempered individuals away from the rugby field, but bringing this kind of behaviour to the rugby scene is not what we want in the game of rugby. Now, I know over the years that rugby players from different nations have done some pretty horrible and nasty things on rugby grounds around the world. That doesn't make it all right, and in this instance, these two Fijians, it doesn't make them all right. I'm not going to side on anybody who's saying that these things are just part of the game, that it's part of rugby being tough men. This is actually violent behaviour and could cause serious problems to the people who are affected by this, and there's no need for it in the game either. I don't know what Lomani was trying to prove. The referee was standing there. It was his job to make any decisions about foul play and whether or not Canham was in the wrong position at the time. It wasn't up to Lomani to take the justice into his own hands and deal with it in that particular way. You know, we've seen some pretty bone-crushing tackles in Super Rugby so far this year, and for me that's perfectly okay. That's what rugby's all about. But when it comes to senseless points of violence like we've seen in these two instances, it really needs to be stopped, and I'm really disappointed in the judiciary system here that didn't put these two guys away for a longer period of time. So there you go. I wanted to make a video about this. I've been pretty upset about this situation since it happened, and since the suspension was handed down to Lomani as well. I think he got off way too lightly, but I'd like to hear in your comments what you think about the situation in these two particular cases, and whether or not you think they're acts of violence. And I'd just like to highlight once again, if both of these guys had done this outside of the rugby stadium, they could have found themselves ending up in prison for a number of years in Australia, because that's the law down under, and that's what could have happened to them. So drop me your comments on this one. Let me know what you think, first of all, about the two instances, but then also about the actual punishment that these players got as a result of conducting themselves in this way during the Super Rugby game at Amy Park in Melbourne. Okay, that's it for this particular video. Keep loving your rugby, everybody. Stay safe, stay well. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to hit the old subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, share it with all your rugby mates around the world, and I'll see you again very, very soon in the next video. Until then, it's time to say adios from beautiful Mexico. Bye for now.